So WandaVision was nice and weird, wasn't it? So usually I don't tackle TV shows on this channel because I don't know how to do it really well. I've tried multiple times but I've just never really been satisfied with the result, but I still want to talk about the MCU on this channel, so talking about TV shows is now going to be required reading. WandaVision is the first in the lineup of Disney Plus TV shows that are going to make up the beginning of Phase 4, and I'm going to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the lineup we got. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is over and it really wasn't my thing. It's sort of like one of the movies with a much lower budget following characters that I don't particularly care for. And Loki seems like it'll be a lot of fun, but I just didn't like the fact that the franchise is becoming similar to the comics and that character deaths just don't really matter. I also had that feeling with WandaVision as well, but this show stuck out to me a lot more. While the other shows seem like they want to be adventures in the MCU following these characters, WandaVision wanted to tell its story in a fully original way. The best thing about having a long-running franchise that is as massive as something like the MCU is being able to put old characters in a brand new context, exploring ideas or concepts that can keep your brand fresh. So seeing WandaVision embrace the sitcom aesthetic and fully committing to what it wanted to do was the thing that made me hooked. The main reason that there's such a burnout to films in the MCU is because they don't really do enough to stand out from the others, even when it comes to introducing new aspects of the world. WandaVision's insistence on telling its story through the lens of a sitcom not only brings aspects of the universe out in unique ways, but also goes far in furthering the development of our characters outside of just making another action movie. Now, I'm just gonna warn you right now, there will be intermittent spoilers throughout the entire video. I'll try to go through as much of it as I can at first without spoiling too many of the major heavy aspects of it, but the second half of the video will have a lot more direct spoiler talk. This is a show that it's better if you go in blind because the mystery is sort of most of what makes it interesting. So there, that's your general warning. The show is fun not only for fans of the MCU or these characters, but also for people who genuinely just enjoy sitcoms. Each episode takes you through a different decade of sitcom tropes, with the episode fully matching the aesthetic, the writing, and even the music. Even the theme song to each episode works as a sort of MCU parody of whatever they're trying to go off of. And all of it is in service of hiding the mystery of what is truly going on, so people who want to see how this connects to the larger narrative of the MCU can find a great mystery hidden within the layers of the show. So you have a thriller trying to fight for prominence from behind the sitcom mold. It's awesome, it's twisted, and it's exactly what the MCU needed to open with after Avengers Endgame. I will say as the show continues, the MCU elements become more and more prominent, so if you're just going into it for the sitcom parodies, you might get disappointed by the second half of the show. I always had a bit of an issue with Wanda's character in the movies because her powers were always inconsistent between each release. In Age of Ultron, she could make people hallucinate and make things float, but by Endgame, she was going all Dragon Ball Z firing energy blasts and her mind powers never really came up again. She was also one of those characters I always felt was sidelined in the movies. With a cast as large as the MCU, many of them just had a lot of their development off screen, and Wanda and Vision's relationship was one of them. We barely see them interact in the movies, and we're pretty much just told that by Infinity War, they're in love. It is one thing that the MCU doesn't really do well when it comes to its long-form storytelling, and it happens to many characters in the franchise. They don't have any chemistry in any movie because they share so little screen time in those movies. But the show taking the approach that it did sort of fixes the problem that I had. It gives us a chance to see Wanda and Vision actually interact, and now we can see the chemistry that the movies were just hinting at. Everyone in this show gives a magnificent performance, perfectly nailing the era of sitcom that they're parodying. I like that they also gave a reason as to why the world chosen was that of sitcoms, by tying it to Wanda's character rather than it being some random thing they do for funsies. I would have liked to see her go down the TV tropes rabbit hole to make sure she's getting every detail correct, but it doesn't need to be that immersive. Marvel has always done a good job of blending comedy into their action, and this show's very much a take on that idea, but rather than action, it's more psychological thriller. There are moments that the show just naturally adjusts from the perfect sitcom to some macabre tense scene, and it flows very well from one to the other. The first few episodes commit so hard to the sitcom aesthetic that you almost forget that this is one of the first looks of the world we get post-Endgame, especially since Spider-Man more or less played it for laughs and ignored it. Now, we actually see the frantic world that is built, we see the confusion and devastation that it caused, we see how the world is attempting to readjust. And something really cool is the fact that we don't get that at first. A lot of people did not like the fact that we weren't getting this show weekly, but I ultimately think that the show is better off for it. Marvel has always been the best at creating hype around their products, and especially with how weird WandaVision gets, having this show come out once a week adds to that hype. Mandalorian was the first Disney Plus show to do this, but each episode was more or less a different adventure, but here, every episode flows into the next, adding more to the mystery that we're trying to uncover. It was really weird seeing the crowd that loves the end credits credit stingers that tease a movie that's not happening for another year or two get really mad that they had to wait a week to figure out what was going on in the show. The big thing I was scared of with these shows was knowing that each episode wouldn't have the same sort of budget the movies had, and we've seen what happens when a movie in the MCU doesn't have the massive budget that it needs. But to my surprise, it seemed to have used its own limitations as a way to save money where they could. So many of the effect shots in the early sitcom episodes were done practically, which also helps contrast the wacky world that Wanda has created in Westview. And this contrast is shown in the very first episode. When Wanda's in the kitchen, everything floating and moving around is done practically. Or it's CGI meant to look practical, but either way, the idea is still there. Even the theme song has Vision going through the door with some cheesy special effects rather than the super detailed phasing effect that we're used to. That is, until Kitty breaks Wanda's concentration and forces Vision to save the guy using his natural abilities. It's weird, dark, and eerie, and perfectly contrasts the tone for the so-called perfect sitcom life and the harsh reality that is outside the town. So from here on out, I'm gonna get a lot more spoiler heavy, so if you still want to go in blind, just end the video here. But then again, if you were on Twitter pretty much the day the episode premiered, you already had everything from it spoiled for you. Episode 4 is about the halfway point of the show, and the thing I like about it is that it kept the show going at a very fast pace. I remember the early days of WandaVision were more trying to figure out what was going on, so I thought we wouldn't really understand the mystery until the very end. So when episode 4 showed us a peek behind the curtain, it felt welcomed. As much as I would have loved seeing this being a straight up sitcom all the way through, I know that a lot of people would have been bored by that. Seeing the show switch gears into something more familiar was fun, especially since we do still get the really well done sitcom parody sprinkled throughout. As the facade of the false reality of the TV show starts to break down, so much is done subtly to show the switch. In the first few episodes, its use of color is striking and scary, always being oversaturated to make it contrast even more to the black and white style of the current world. Even later on, aspect ratio becomes a major factor of the world around us. The city of Westview has a constantly evolving aspect ratio that changes with every iteration of the world, starting in 4:3 and evolving to 16:9 as the show continues. And whenever we look outside of Westview, everything is shot in 2:3:5. What they use for the standard cinema look, keeping in line with the other movies in the MCU. I went to film school for 4 years, and most of what I use my education for is paragraphs like that. It was also really nice seeing the cast forced to play the characters outside of their usual element. I like to think that the only reason the Scarlet Witch show gets the sitcom parody treatment is because they had Elizabeth Olsen. Her sister played a witch in a movie, and it didn't go so well.
Best embrace the suck.
We've seen our leads play their respective characters for years on screen, but this is an entirely different context for them, and I must say, I kind of want Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany to just have a sitcom together. Their ability to transition between each decade and style of sitcom is nothing short of great. Even when the world around them starts to break down, they're still committed to the bit. Everyone and everything is being influenced to be like this, so they still need to portray these characters' grief, emotions, and fucked situation they're in while still being in line with the portrayal of how the sitcom of the era would handle the situation. And the times they do break character and go more superhero-y makes those moments more impactful since they're breaking the rules of the established world. The returning characters of the MCU were also a welcome surprise. A lot of people don't like Darcy in the MCU, but it's Kat Dennings and I love her. I'm glad Randall Park is finally getting the recognition he deserves as an actor because he's an absolute delight that for years he's just been regulated to being called John Krasinski by fans of The Office or Kim Jong-un. Teyonah Parris also did a great job, although I feel like the writers didn't really know what to do with her character after episode 4. Rarely do we see someone in the MCU recast, and every time we have, they take the character into a radically different direction. But Parris manages to still feel like the character that we saw in Captain Marvel, just grown up. I can see how the little girl we saw in the 90s became this character in the modern day, and it's an extremely nice addition that you can tell is setting up something bigger. And maybe in the future they'll actually give her something to do. She just does not have a lot of agency in the show once she is ejected from Westview. She gets her powers and then is just sidelined until the final episode. Captain Marvel 2, yeah. But to me, the star of the show was Kathryn Hahn. I'm gonna be honest, I've never seen her give a bad performance. Even when she's in a bad movie, she tends to be the standout of it. Her range is incredible and she easily slips into the roles she's given, whether that's the annoying neighbor or the crazy villain. The only thing negative I have to say about her performance is the fact that she's regulated to a background character for so much of the show. I get that part of the show's mystery was wondering if she was connected to what was going on, but she was the standout performer performance in every episode she was in, always bringing that unique Catherine Hahn energy to it all. I really hope we get to see her in the MCU more in the future because she absolutely kills it. It spent every episode showing its story off in an absolutely unique way that really sets it apart from everything else in the MCU. Become the very last episode, we just get a very generic Marvel fight that feels like it goes against everything the show is building up toward. Like, the Vision fight ending with a philosophical fight in the library is exactly the type of ending you expect for this character, and was reflective of who he is. But for Wanda, I didn't want all of her problems to be solved by a giant Dragon Ball Z fight. It would have been interesting to see a magic fight done in a different way. We have been shown that she can manipulate reality itself, and Agatha had absorbed some of her power already. Fighting through the different realities and art styles that the show used up until that point would have made for a climax that is wholly unique for what the show was attempting to do. I also feel like the show is straight up dishonest to the audience for a major part of it. There's misdirecting the audience, and then there's flat out lying to them. Agatha All Along was a fun song that's totally in character for Agatha and hilarious to boot, but the next episode showed that it wasn't her? Everything happening was Wanda going nuts that Agatha just sort of saw happen and said, "What's going on here? Better check this out." It's a lie, not a misdirect. A lie. There is no way the audience could have known, and it just made Agatha a less cool character than I was expecting her to be. Same with the Quicksilver reveal. Putting Evan Peters in that role is a very loaded casting choice. We know that this show leads into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. We know that Wanda has near unlimited powers. Her pulling Quicksilver from across the multiverse is totally within possibility. I don't mind that he wasn't pulled in by Wanda because it could show the power of the witches in the MCU, but the fact that he was just a misdirect will make this sort of reveal much less impactful if they decide to do it down the line. They threw away the hype of any sort of Marvel movie multiverse for the sake of a boner joke. That's some Leo level writing right there. His reveal was set up all the way in episode 1 with Agatha talking about her husband Ralph, but the meta casting decision just ends up hurting that in my opinion. This show didn't need to be this giant tentpole moment in the MCU, but it tried so hard to masquerade as that. It easily could have just been a personal, down-to-earth story about Wanda dealing with grief and depression. I feel like that would have been better, to be honest. All of the issues I had with the show were when it felt like it just needed to be another story in the MCU. We honestly didn't need a villain for the show, let alone 2 of them. Vision is a very philosophical character. All of his best moments are when he's just talking rather than fighting. The show could have been about Wanda almost letting her powers consume the world and becoming a villain, creating Vision as her voice of reason. But no, we needed a big Marvel fight at the end with supervillains because that's what people expect out of the MCU. Either way, despite all that, I mostly enjoyed what WandaVision had to offer. The sitcom mystery stuff was a much more interesting way of telling the narrative, and I wish it followed through on that a bit more before devolving into, well, Marvel. But that's just my opinion on the show, and I would love to see your guys' take on it. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Please let me know down below. And if you want to see what I have to say about other movies in the MCU and other comic book movies as well, then please click that playlist right over there. And why not subscribe so you know whenever I post a new video? Thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.